Have you ever wondered how the mechanical gear was invented that basically led to the invention of all machines? Or who invented the adding machine that led to the calculator that of course led to the computer? Or have you ever looked at a paperclip and wondered, I wonder who the guy is that invented all the grooves that went on a paperclip? Well, answers to these and much, much more in this week's episode of Strange As It Seems. Welcome back. I'm Jeff Hicks, curator of the Strange As It Seems archives and grandnephew of John Hicks, who created Strange As It Seems back in the 1920s. For this week's episode and next week's, I found a couple of interesting folders in the Hicks family archives on inventions and inventors. What I found interesting looking through these files was thinking back to that time in the 30s, 40s, and 50s when people were inventing things like crazy. And it kind of reminded me that, in this day and age with AI and computers, and you don't really hear, or it doesn't come up in conversation, like, hey, people are thinking about inventing things as much anymore. But certainly in this day and age, people were inventing things left and right. And of course, Strange As It Seems was there to tell the story. So let's dive in. We'll start in the John Hicks era, which of course, John Hicks is my grand uncle who started and launched Strange As It Seems back in the late 1920s. This one's from 1931, and it looks like his brother, Ernest Hicks, featured it again after John Hicks passed away. He died in 1944 of myocarditis on D-Day. Strange As It Seems, had nothing to do with the war. But here in 1931, here's the story of the simplest invention that made a fortune for the guy who did it. And he was the guy who basically put scratches on paper clips. Crazy. Ernest Hicks carried it again in late 1940s. And here's the story. An even smaller change, somewhat similar in result, is said to have made a fortune for the man who conceived it. He is Clarence C. Collette of Amsterdam, New York, the holder of a profitable patent on an improved paperclip. The difference between the new clip and the old one is simply that the Collette clip is provided with tiny nicks, scratches in the metal that give it a rough surface and prevent papers from slipping out of the fastener. Fascinating. Clarence Collette of Amsterdam, New York, inventor of the grooves on a paperclip. And this from the John Hicks scrapbook, which kind of ran parallel to Strange As It Seems in the early 1940s, the Sunday comic, the John Hicks scrapbook. And it was an interesting discovery by E.G. Atchison from Niagara Falls, who basically came up with this discovery. He found it in the Bible. He found the clue to Egyptianizing clay, a process that, I guess was shown in Exodus, a valuable commercial process wherein tannin, a substance is found in straw, greatly improves the quality of clay. An invention that came from reading the Bible. And here's another invention that was featured in, looks like 1934 by John Hicks, the star power motor. This is Dr. W.W. Koblenz from the U.S. Bureau of Standards. He invented an instrument to convert the light of distant stars into mechanical power. It actually converts the light of stars into heat, then electricity, then mechanical energy. It employs a highly sensitive thermocouple to convert radiated heat into electricity. Electricity is converted into mechanical energy by the galvanometer. Although, of course, the mechanical energy produced by the instrument is very slight, it is measurable and can be seen in the movement of the galvanometer indicator. Thus, the amount of light from any particular star can be measured. Amazing. The Star Power Motor by Dr. W.W. Koblenz. Have you ever noticed that all the instruments searching for intelligent life are pointed away from the Earth? And next up, from the John Hicks era, we have the micropantograph. This is a really interesting machine. This can reproduce the entire text of the Bible 49 times on a space 1 inch square. Invented by N. Peters of London back in 1852, it's used to reproduce microscopically pen and ink writing. Totally invisible to the naked eye, it appeared quite legible under a magnification of 2,000 times or more. An improved form of the Peters machine was later made by A. McEwen and a Reverend J.G. Crawford of New York. And a few more from the John Hicks era. Here's a rat trap invention from Joe Albertson, Orick, Missouri, We also have the handwritten letter from Joe back on November 27th of 1942, where basically, here's the story. Ingenuity in the form of this alarm clock trap device adds to Mr. Albertson's sleep each morning. The mine operator is setting the clock. When the bell rings, the attached string vibrates, snapping the mousetrap, which is on the shelf above in this picture. That throws a switch. It starts an electric pump working. It takes the pump some time to eject the water that has seeped into the shaft overnight, and that chore must be accomplished before workers arrive. A little rat trap invention. Gave Joe Albertson an extra 3 hours of sleep every morning. Strange as it seems. You know, of all the inventions over the last 100 years, the dry erase board has to be the most remarkable. We have a couple more inventions from the John Hicks era, although I noticed on the dates here, these were June 14th and June 30th of 1944, which was actually after my grand uncle John Hicks had passed away from myocarditis. Strange as it seems, he died on D-Day, had nothing to do with the war, but it was June 6, 1944. So this was actually in my grandfather's era as he continued the comic strip on after my granduncle John had passed away. But here is an invention on Canada's frozen lakes, a fish net where fish actually catch themselves. The force of their tugging against the net sets off a trigger. It drops a weight and then it whips the loaded net up through the hole in the ice. The fish are then dumped and allowed to freeze before shipping. A fish catching themselves invention. And then the final one from the John Hicks era was a peaceful gun. Keep in mind, this was during World War II, right? So just a couple of weeks after D-Day. But this is the peaceful gun invented by E.Y. Keith of West Palm Beach, Florida. It shot newspapers into the cylindrical boxes. He was driving on one side of the car. This is before postal cars right now with the driver on the right side, but the driver used to be on the left side of the post office mobiles, and he invented a gun that shot cylindrical newspapers, right? Rolled into a cylinder and shot them right into the mailbox. Peaceful gun by E.Y. Keith of West Palm Beach, Florida. And so that wraps it for the John Hicks era. Moving into further into the Ernest Hicks era, looks like he had a couple of inventions by U.S. presidents here. We have the invention, if you've ever been to Monticello, the invention of Thomas Jefferson. I think everybody has seen this or heard of it, but there was a small dumbwaiter, right, built into the mantle of his dining room that brought wine up from the cellar. The old dumbwaiter invented by Thomas Jefferson. And then, of course, George Washington invented a mousetrap. This is found at actually the ancestral home of George Washington, not Mount Vernon here, but the ancestral home of Sulgrave Manor in England. There's an invention there of a mousetrap that basically crushed the mice to death. Kind of gruesome invention there. And then another one from Ernest Hicks in the late 1940s about the cash register. Interestingly enough, the cash register was invented not to tally up necessarily the sales of the day from customers, but the reason the cash register was invented was to prevent dishonesty and theft in retail stores. Speaking of inventions, I saw in my local pharmacy the other day a slimming powder for $30. Makes you slimmer. I asked the pharmacy, I said, how much could I expect to lose? And he said, $30. And then the final one from the Ernest Hicks era. And this is interesting. In the late 1940s, they thought, and still may be true, but the greatest decade of all in terms of inventions was 1880 to 1890. Amazing amount of things invented that decade. You had the automobile, the trolley car, the incandescent light, the cash register, as we just talked about, the dynamo, the pneumatic tire, smokeless powder, transparent film, electric welding, the cyanide process, as well as the electric furnace. An amazing decade of inventions, 1880 to 1890, which kind of closed out the Ernest Hicks era of Strange as It Seems, when he passed away from a plane crash. He died in a plane crash, and then my grandma Elsie took over. And one of the early ones in 1949, after Elsie Hicks had taken over, another interesting fact about inventions is that 1 in every 6 inventions listed in the U.S. Patent Office since 1899, at the end of that decade of amazing inventions, but 1 out of every 6 inventions listed in the office since then was for an automotive device. So for 50 years, 1 in every 6 inventions was related to an automobile. Crazy. Continuing on in the Elsie Hicks era of the early 1950s, we have dishpan meteorology. Here's an invention by Dr. Dave Foltz from the University of Chicago. Developed a laboratory device which looks kind of like a rotating dishpan, but he was studying how major air currents behave that make our weather. Kind of interesting considering this time when we're cutting back research dollars and information about or technology that helps us predict the weather. This is back in the early 1950s, and we have a letter here, which is actually from George Mann at the University of Chicago, the Public Relations Office, and all the interesting information. We had the research reports from the University of Chicago and a University of Chicago magazine article. Quite an invention from Dr. Dave Foltz of the University of Chicago in helping us understand weather and weather patterns in the early 1950s. And here's the answer to a question at the top of the episode. Who was it that invented the first mechanical gear? Well, it was the ancient Egyptians. Apparently the ancient Egyptians invented the mechanical gear, about which practically no modern machinery could operate. It was first applied for lifting water from a well or stream using the power of oxen. The problem was to transmit power from a vertical shaft to a horizontal one. Pharaoh's subjects solved that problem by putting wooden pegs in the rims of crude wheels and mounting them at right angles to each other. Buckets on the rim of the third wheel picked up the water and then dumped it into an irrigation ditch or a tank desired. And in the early 1950s, the same machines were still in use in Egypt, and for all we know, might still be in use today. Yeah, I heard the inventor of the USB stick died the other day. Yeah, apparently they took his coffin, they lowered it in, pulled it back up, turned it the other way, lowered it in again. And here's an answer to another question from the top of the episode. Who invented the adding machine? The adding machine was invented by Blaise Pascal, the famous philosopher and inventor from ancient times. And he actually invented it because of his interest in roulette and other games of chance. Basically invented the adding machine to experiment and establish probable betting systems. That's how the adding machine, which led to the calculator, which led to the modern computer. It was all invented for games of chance by Pascal. And here's an invention that I don't think stuck around very long, but it was basically for stenographers. It was the steno mask. And it looks like we have a really interesting picture of the steno mask there, which, funny enough, a lot of people sent in letters like the Neptune Distributing Company that actually were looking to buy this steno mask. Really, really interesting way. I guess you could record up to 350 words per minute. The military use of the steno mask became kind of popular, I guess, in the early 1950s, and those chosen for future training, if the steno mask is adopted, maybe it wasn't, but they will be high school graduates with an IQ of 100 or higher and with no speech impediments. Airmen and non-commissioned officers who have had some experience in military legal matters will be preferred. Those completing training will have to agree to serve at least 18 months on active duty after completion of the course to learn how to use the steno mask. And another invention featured in the Elsie Hicks era. My grandmother Elsie was quite the stickler for detail. She had amazing amounts of proof built up in the files for each of the facts, and in fact, in the patent inventions folder here, she had several of the actual patents she would send out. It was 25 cents at the time to send, and here's the letter she sent to the U.S. Patent Office. They sent it back along with the actual patent itself, and this one was for the patent issued in July 1952 for a phonetic sound producing dictionary, and here's the diagram of it. So a dictionary that could actually be read, right? So the sound producing dictionary invented in the early 1950s, strange as it seems. I also heard the inventor of the wind chill factor died the other day. He was 86, though he felt more like 64. Here's another invention featured by my teetotaling and very conservative Episcopalian grandmother Elsie, by the way. This is funny to me. She featured in the 1950s an electronic barrel invented by Alan Tamplin of Burnham, England, which she basically says was operated by radio, and it rolls in either direction at various speeds, which is interestingly enough, except she left out the best part about this barrel, which here's the letter from Alan Tamplin in England, Burnham Cottage in Westlands, and Burnham, England, I guess, is where this is from. And she said, the barrel, which you already knew, is operated by radio. You roll in either direction, but it dispenses Guinness beer. Basically, you hit the little bell, and then the electronic barmaid that sits inside can ring a bell for time, gentlemen, please. And the barrel rolls out, pours a glass of Guinness, and then rolls right back into the building. So essentially, this operated barrel operates like a barmaid, brings you a glass of Guinness, fills your glass, and rolls back uphill. Hysterical, strange as it seems. And here's another invention featured by my grandma Elsie in the 1950s that she sent off a letter, including 25 cents for the actual patent of this invention by Harry Shrigley. And it was an invention that basically made safes safer. It was a simple attachment to the inner panel of a safe door. And apparently gas was in a container and can be easily broken whenever impact or pressure is applied to the tumblers of the safe combination, driving them inward. I guess the most frequent attempts against safes at the time were made by knob knockers, was their name, whose method is to knock off the knob or the dial of the combination lock and drive the tumblers inward so the latch bolts can be released. And this invention by Harry let out an noxious gas, knocked out the safecracker, and left him incapacitated to be picked up later by the police. Strange as it seems. Did you hear about the inventor who displayed the first knife ever? Apparently a friend of his walked up and said, "That's the most amazing invention since bread." And he said, "I'm about to blow your mind." And the final two inventions from the Strange as it seems archives in the late 1950s, we had the this is interesting. The grass cutter by Cornelius Hubner of Smoke Rise, Butler, New Jersey. And it's the grass shaver. Apparently, this inventor figured out that he could use old razor blades to then cut hedges and grass. The modern garden tool with the sharpest cutting edge only needs 4 used razor blades, called the grass shaver, strange as it seems. And the last invention from the annals of Elsie Hicks in the 1950s. Here's a photograph of the megaphone. This was it's probably still used today by protesters. I think I've seen a few of these recently at the No Kings protests here in Santa Monica. But this is when the transistorized megaphone was invented. It operates from tiny batteries. This was shortly after, I think just a few years after, the transistor was invented, and it was applied to a megaphone, right? Amplifies the normal speaking voice to a volume comparable to the loudest yell. And quite a few letters in here asking where they could find them, including a handwritten letter, interestingly enough, from looks like a logging company. Yeah, Zweit Logging Company. And said, "We are in the contract logging business in steep mountainous terrain where the walkie-talkie does not work And his thought was, hey, we think that this battery-powered megaphone may be the best way for communication between crane operator and ground crew out in the forest for logging. Fascinating, strange as it seems. Well, that does it for this episode on Inventions. Next, we'll go into inventors. I've got a folder on inventors that we'll go into next. But if you like stories of the strange, unusual, strange facts about history, science, nature, and so on from the 30s, 40s, and 50s archives of Strange As It Seems, hit the bell to subscribe. Leave a comment below. Let me know what invention you found the most interesting, or maybe an invention that you know that we should have covered in this week's episode. And we'll see you next week here at Strange As It Seems.